I was hired to move rubble. That is the whole truth of how it began. Not because I was chosen, not because some elder pointed at me across a crowded room, not because the survey team saw something in my eyes that they couldn't name. I was hired because I was the cheapest able body in the valley, because I owned a good pair of work gloves and a barrow with a wheel that didn't wobble, and because the foreman, a tired man named Creel, told me the rate was 2 marks an hour, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. The Karath Plateau had been an excavation site for 11 years by the time I arrived. 11 years of scholars and survey crews, of atmospheric monitors and resonance arrays, of arguments in tents and published papers nobody agreed on. The plateau sat at 4,000 meters above the valley floor, a broad shelf of ancient gray stone, jutting from the mountain's shoulder like a raised fist. Whatever civilization had built there left almost nothing readable on the surface. A few foundation lines. The suggestion of a plaza, maybe 300 meters across, and deep in the center, half buried by 11 centuries of wind-blown grit and 2 recent storm seasons, a row of carved pillars that the scholars had catalogued and ultimately declared inert. The storm that came through the week before I was hired knocked the site's eastern retaining wall into the excavation trench and scattered 3 months of careful brushwork under half a meter of loose rubble. The scholars left. Weather protocols, Creel told me. They'd be back when the system passed. Until then, he needed the trench cleared, the rubble sorted to the eastern mound, and the pillars brushed back to their prior state. Simple work, the kind that doesn't require a degree. I started at first light on the second day, when the wind had dropped to something manageable, and the pale sky over the plateau had opened into a thin, cold blue. No warmth in it, no softness, just light, arriving from very far away. I pulled on the gloves, picked up the short-handled brush the team had left in the equipment shed, and walked to the central trench. There were 7 pillars in the row. Each stood roughly 2 meters high, carved from the same gray stone as the plateau, so they looked less like objects placed on the site and more like the mountain had pushed them up from underneath. Surface patterns ran the full height of each shaft, tight, deliberate, nothing like natural fracture lines. But 11 years of examination had produced no translation, no activation, no response to anything the survey crews had tried. The general consensus was that the carvings were decorative, memorial possibly, certainly dead. I started at the far end of the row and worked toward the center. The storm rubble was loose, broken grit, plate-sized chips of surface stone, the odd scatter of equipment the wind had flung, and it moved easily. I shoveled and barrowed, and the morning went by, the way physical work does, when your body knows what it's doing, and your mind is left to roam. By mid-morning, I had cleared to the 4th pillar. This one stood apart from the others by perhaps half a meter. I'd noticed it on the survey maps in the shed, marked with a small notation I hadn't been able to read. The storm rubble was heavier here, piled against the shaft's base in a way that suggested the pillar itself had interrupted the flow. I set down the barrow and started with the brush, working around the base, clearing the worst of it by hand. My palm went flat against the stone, to brace myself as I leaned in. Nothing happened. Not immediately. I kept brushing. The stone under my palm was cold, the way old stone is always cold at altitude, and the carved surface was rough under the heel of my hand, the lines running under my skin like a page of text I was reading blind. I didn't think anything of it. I was focused on the rubble. But somewhere in the next few minutes, I couldn't say exactly when, the cold changed. It didn't warm up. That's important to say. It didn't glow, didn't pulse, didn't do any of the things the survey team's reports described trying to provoke with their instruments and sound arrays. It simply became less cold, the way a stone does when it has been in contact with something living long enough to borrow a little of that warmth, except I hadn't been touching it long enough for that. I hadn't been touching it more than a few minutes. I pulled my hand back and looked at my palm. Nothing there. The glove was fine. I pressed it to the stone again, lower this time, near the base where the carving was deepest, and that was when I felt the first vibration. Not a sound, not quite. More like the memory of a sound, the way you feel a bell's resonance in your sternum long after the note has gone. A low, settled frequency that seemed to come, not from inside the stone, but from below it, from the rock of the mountain itself, as though something very old had been sleeping at the root of this place, and was now, slowly, drawing a first breath. I stood up straight. The carvings on the shaft's surface were different. Not changed. I understood that even as I thought it. They hadn't moved, hadn't rearranged, but the light on them had altered. The thin, cold blue of the morning sky was still overhead, but the lines on the stone were catching it differently now, pooling it, holding it in a way that made the carved channels seem deeper than they were. A violet tinge ran through them, faint at first, like the color you see at the edge of a bruise, then less faint. I did not step back. I don't know why I didn't step back. There was no threat in it. That much I can tell you with certainty. Whatever was waking in the stone was not hostile. If I had to name the feeling, I would say it was the feeling of being seen. Not examined, not studied, seen. The way a person is seen by someone who has been waiting for them, who has kept their image clearly in mind through a very long absence, and is now simply confirming that yes, this is the one, this is the face. The violet deepened along every carved line on the shaft, and then it moved. Not randomly, not like light caught in a turning crystal, but deliberately, running from line to line in a sequence that felt grammatical, felt like something being read aloud. The resonance under my feet built, not to noise, but to a fullness in the air, the way pressure changes before weather, the way a room changes when everyone in it goes quiet at once. And the stele spoke. I say spoke because I have no better word. There was no mouth, no mechanism I could see. The sound came from the stone, and from the air around it, and from somewhere below the altitude where sound normally lives. It was not loud. It did not need to be. 5 words, low and sure, carrying the absolute certainty of something that has had 10,000 years to decide exactly how it will say this, and has been waiting for the right moment, with perfect patience. The plateau remembers its own. The violet in the carved lines held steady. The resonance held. The thin, cold sky above was unchanged, the pale alien light still falling across the gray stone plaza, and I was standing in the middle of all of it, with a short-handled brush in one hand, and a work glove still on the other, and my blood was telling me something that my mind was only beginning to catch up to. I had not been deceived into coming here. Creel had not been chosen by anyone. The storm that knocked the retaining wall into the trench had not been arranged, and yet here I was. And here the 4th pillar of 7 was blazing in a cold violet that no survey team in 11 years had ever produced, and the plateau was telling me, in words I did not speak and had never been taught, that it knew me. Not my name, not my face, something older than either, something carried in the line of a family so far back that the family itself had forgotten what it once was. A bloodline, a belonging, the kind of thing you don't apply for, don't earn, don't discover in any archive, the kind of thing that simply is, and waits, and one day looks up from the stone at the first hand that is finally the right one. I stood there for a long time. When I finally moved, I did not leave. I set the brush down against the base of the shaft, and I pressed both palms flat to the carved surface, and I held them there, while the light did what it did, and the plateau said what it had apparently been waiting 10,000 years to say again. And I thought about Creel, about the 2 marks an hour, about the wheel on my barrow that didn't wobble. The scholars would come back when the weather cleared. I was going to have a great deal to tell them. And none of it would matter. Not really, because whatever I was about to become was already decided, had been decided, before the mountain finished growing, and the only thing that had ever needed to happen was for someone with the right blood in his veins to put a bare hand to the right stone on a cold blue morning and hold it there long enough. That was all it took. That was enough.